You're done, Victor. Security will escort you out, the new VP sneered, practically drooling over my $5 patent bonus. I just nodded and handed over my keycard. He thought he won the jackpot. He didn't realize he just unhooked the life support on an $80 manufacturing empire. I am a 52-year-old chief engineer, and for the last 22 years I poured my blood, sweat, and absolute sanity into Apex industrial manufacturing. When I first joined the firm fresh out of a grueling stint in heavy machinery design, we were a mid-sized operation barely scraping by with outdated stamping presses and inefficient hydraulic systems. The founder, Carter, was a visionary but completely technically illiterate. He relied on me to transform his dying factory floor into a modernized beast. Over the decades, I meticulously engineered a fully automated, synchronized assembly line. It wasn't just a conveyor belt. It was an intricate ballet of robotics, pneumatic actuators, and proprietary industrial software that I coded myself. I designed the custom PLC logic controllers, the robotic arm pathing algorithms, and the sensor arrays that dropped our defect rate to practically zero. Because of my systems, our annual revenue skyrocketed to $80 million. We were the dominant supplier of precision aerospace components in the region. Carter respected me. We had an old-school gentleman's agreement, solidified in a highly specific employment contract. When I developed the proprietary automation software and the hardware schematics, known internally as the Titan Matrix, I didn't just hand it over to the company. I was smart enough to register the core patents and the software copyright under my own personal limited liability company, Vanguard Engineering LLC. I then leased the exclusive use rights of the Titan Matrix back to Apex Industrial for a nominal fee of $1 a year. It was a symbiotic relationship. They got a state-of-the-art facility that crushed the competition, and I retained the ultimate leverage over my life's work. But things changed when Carter's health took a downturn. At 65, he decided to step back from day-to-day operations. Instead of appointing a seasoned operations director, he brought in his 31-year-old nephew, Julian. Julian was the epitome of a corporate parasite. He had an MBA from an expensive school, zero practical experience in manufacturing, and an ego that could eclipse the sun. He wore perfectly tailored suits to a factory floor that smelled of ozone and machine oil, looking at the workers as if they were a different species. Julian's mandate was to streamline operations and prepare the company for a massive private equity buyout. The PE firm was particularly interested in our proprietary automation technology. They valued the Titan Matrix at an additional $5 million on top of the company's valuation. According to my contract, upon the sale of the company or the licensing of the tech to a third party, I was entitled to a $5 million buyout bonus for transferring the Vanguard LLC patents to Apex. Julian saw that number on the ledger and his eyes turned green. He couldn't fathom a glorified mechanic walking away with a check that large money he desperately wanted to add to his own equity payout. Every morning, I arrived at the facility at 5:30. I would walk the floor, listening to the hum of the servos and the rhythmic thud of the pneumatic presses. I knew every machine like the back of my hand. The Titan Matrix was a closed-loop system, heavily encrypted and protected by a robust two-factor authentication protocol. It required constant micro-adjustments and calibration, which I handled from a specialized server room I built on the mezzanine level. Julian hated that server room. He hated that I had absolute control over the heart of the factory. He started looking for ways to undermine me. He nitpicked my budget requests, delayed critical maintenance approvals, and openly questioned my authority in front of the shift supervisors. The friction between us was a grinding gear in an otherwise smooth machine. He wanted to cut costs by sourcing cheaper, substandard raw materials, ignoring my warnings that the automated tolerances were too tight for cheap steel. When a batch of inferior alloy caused a minor jam on line 3, Julian tried to blame my software. I calmly pulled the diagnostic logs and proved it was a material failure, embarrassing him in front of the board. That was the moment he decided I had to go. He needed to get rid of me before the private equity deal closed, and he needed a pretext to seize my technology without paying the $5 million bonus. He spent weeks digging through employee handbooks, old emails, and security footage, desperately searching for a fireable offense. What he didn't realize was that my contract was ironclad, and the licensing agreement for the Titan Matrix was a loaded gun with the safety off, pointed directly at the company's foundation. The climax of Julian's petty crusade arrived on a dreary Tuesday afternoon. I had been working 80-hour weeks to prepare the factory for a massive increase in production volume required by a new aerospace contract. The stress was palpable, the machines were running hot, and the maintenance schedule was stretched thin. Over the weekend, my father had suffered a severe cardiac event. I had spent 48 hours in the intensive care unit, fueled by vending machine coffee and sheer panic. I had emailed Julian in HR on Sunday night, explicitly stating I would be taking 2 days of emergency family leave. My contract generously allotted for personal emergencies, especially given my decades of flawless attendance. I had remote access to the Titan Matrix on my encrypted laptop, ensuring I could handle any critical software faults from the hospital waiting room. The physical factory floor was perfectly capable of running autonomously under the supervision of my highly trained shift foreman for a couple of days. When I finally returned to the factory on Wednesday morning, exhausted but relieved that my father was stabilizing, I found my access badge deactivated at the main turnstile. A burly security guard, looking incredibly uncomfortable, escorted me not to the engineering mezzanine, but to the glass-walled conference room near the executive suites. Julian was waiting for me. He was flanked by a newly hired HR director, who looked too young to understand the gravity of the situation, and a junior legal counsel scribbling furiously on a legal pad. Julian was wearing a smirk that made my blood boil. It was the look of a man who thought he had just executed a masterful checkmate. "Have a seat, Victor," Julian said, his voice dripping with condescension. He didn't offer a handshake or ask about my father. He just pushed a thick manila folder across the mahogany table. "We've conducted a thorough review of your recent conduct, and the board has reached a unanimous decision." I remained standing, my hands resting lightly on the back of a leather chair. "Conduct?" "Julian, I took 2 days of emergency family leave. My father was in the ICU. I informed you and HR well in advance." Julian waved a dismissive hand. "Your email was received, but your absence constituted a critical abandonment of your post during a high-stakes production run. Furthermore, an internal audit has revealed multiple instances of insubordination and refusal to comply with cost-saving directives. You've been deliberately obstructing the integration of new operational procedures." He was, of course, referring to my refusal to run substandard raw materials through multi-million-dollar precision equipment. "You're firing me," I stated flatly, the realization settling over me like a cold blanket. "You're firing a 22-year veteran over 2 days of approved sick leave." "We are terminating your employment for cause, effective immediately," Julian corrected, leaning back and steepling his fingers. "Because the termination is for cause, you forfeit all severance packages, including the pending $5 million patent buyout bonus. The company will retain full ownership and operational control of the Titan Matrix software and hardware under the standard work for hire clauses in your original employment documentation." It was a breathtakingly audacious and legally illiterate maneuver. He was relying on a generic boilerplate clause from a contract I signed 2 decades ago, completely ignoring the highly specific, renegotiated intellectual property agreements and the Vanguard Engineering LLC lease documents that superseded everything else. He was gambling that I would be too shocked, too exhausted, or too intimidated to fight back. He thought he could bully a middle-aged engineer out of $5 million with a fake paper trail and a couple of rent-a-cops. I looked at the young legal counsel. "Did you actually read my contract? The intellectual property lease agreement signed by Carter 5 years ago?" The lawyer shifted nervously, avoiding eye contact. "Mr. Julian assured us that the work-for-hire doctrine covers all software developed on company premises." I almost laughed. It was a spectacular display of incompetence. Julian had completely blinded his own legal team to the truth just to get rid of me. I could have fought it right then and there. I could have thrown a tantrum, demanded to call Carter, and threatened a massive lawsuit. But looking at Julian's smug, punchable face, a different plan formed in my mind. A much more satisfying plan. "I see," I said softly, my voice completely devoid of emotion. I reached out and tapped the termination paperwork. So, I am officially relieved of all duties and responsibilities regarding the automated assembly line? Absolutely, Julian sneered. Security will escort you to your office to collect your personal belongings. You have 15 minutes to vacate the premises. We've already revoked your remote access and administrative privileges. Understood, I replied calmly. I turned on my heel and walked out of the conference room, leaving Julian looking slightly confused by my lack of resistance. I marched to the engineering mezzanine, packed my framed photos, my favorite ceramic mug, and a specialized diagnostic hard drive containing the Vanguard LLC master encryption keys. The security guard watched me like a hawk, ensuring I didn't touch the main server terminals. I didn't need to. The trap was already set. As I walked out the front doors into the crisp morning air holding my cardboard box, I felt a strange sense of liberation. Julian had just fired the only man who knew how to keep the monster alive. The moment I stepped off the Apex industrial property, the clock started ticking. Julian's arrogance had blinded him to the fundamental reality of modern industrial automation. He believed the machines were just hunks of metal that would keep stamping and welding indefinitely as long as there was electricity. He didn't understand that the Titan Matrix was a living, breathing digital organism. The proprietary software I had written under Vanguard Engineering LLC was the central nervous system. Without it, the robotic arms were paralyzed, the pneumatic presses were dead weight, and the complex synchronized timing loops would instantly collapse. I drove straight to my lawyer's office, a sharp, aggressive intellectual property attorney named Sarah. She had drafted the original lease agreement for Vanguard LLC and knew every loophole and clause inside out. When I sat down in her office and explained that Julian had terminated me for cause and claimed company ownership of my patents under a bogus work-for-hire argument, she almost choked on her coffee. "He did what?" Sarah asked, her eyes widening in disbelief. "Did they even look at Section 4, Clause 12 of the intellectual property lease?" "I don't think Julian can read anything that isn't a quarterly profit projection," I replied dryly. Clause 12 was the kill switch. It explicitly stated that the $1 a year licensing agreement for the Titan Matrix was entirely contingent on my active employment as chief engineer at Apex Industrial. The lease was a personal concession to Carter, a way to keep operational costs low while guaranteeing my job security and control. The language was unambiguous. If my employment was terminated for any reason by either party, the software licensing agreement was immediately null and void. The moment they fired me, Apex Industrial lost all legal rights to use, operate, or possess the proprietary code running their entire $80 million factory. Furthermore, the hardware schematics for the custom PLC controllers were also under Vanguard's patent umbrella. Using them without a license constituted massive patent infringement under 35 U.S.C. Section 271. "Sarah," I said, leaning forward, "I want to activate the kill switch, formally, legally, right now." She smiled, a predatory grin that made me glad she was on my side. "With pleasure, Victor. I'll draft a cease and desist order immediately. We will formally revoke the software license and demand the immediate cessation of all operations utilizing Vanguard LLC's patented technology. Send it via certified mail, overnight delivery, and email a copy directly to Julian, the board of directors, and the private equity firm they are negotiating with," I instructed. "I want maximum visibility." But the legal paperwork was only half the battle. I needed to ensure the factory physically stopped running before they could try any desperate workarounds or attempt to hack my code. The Titan Matrix was designed with robust fail-safes. As part of standard security protocols to prevent industrial espionage, the main software required a cryptographic handshake with a remote server hosted by Vanguard LLC every 24 hours to verify the integrity of the license key. If the handshake failed, the software would automatically lock down, throwing the entire system into a hard emergency stop to prevent unauthorized operation or data theft. I went home, opened my encrypted laptop, and logged into the Vanguard LLC secure server. With a few keystrokes, I accessed the licensing management portal. I found the active license key assigned to Apex Industrial Manufacturing. My finger hovered over the mouse button for a fraction of a second. I thought about the 22 years I had spent building that factory, The sweat, the late nights, the genuine pride I took in the flawless operation of the machines. Then I thought about Julian's smug face, the bogus termination papers, and his blatant attempt to steal $5 million of my hard-earned money. I clicked Revoke License. Instantly, the secure server severed the cryptographic connection to the factory. The command was sent. The next time the Titan Matrix attempted its routine daily handshake, it would hit a brick wall. The software would recognize that it was operating illegally and initiate the automated lockdown sequence. It was a digital eviction notice. They were running an $80 million operation on stolen technology, and the repo man had just arrived in the form of a heavily encrypted lockdown protocol. I closed my laptop, poured myself a generous glass of aged scotch, and waited for the chaos to begin. I knew exactly what was going to happen. The aerospace components they were manufacturing required microscopic precision. Without the Titan Matrix constantly recalibrating the sensors, the machines would grind to a halt. Julian was about to learn a very expensive lesson in intellectual property law and the consequences of pissing off the man who holds the keys to the kingdom. The fallout was instantaneous and catastrophic. At precisely 6:00 a.m. the following morning, during the shift changeover, the Titan Matrix attempted its routine cryptographic handshake with the Vanguard server. The connection was denied. Across the massive 300,000 square foot facility, red warning lights flashed simultaneously. The deafening roar of the automated stamping presses fell silent. The robotic welding arms froze mid-arc, their servos locking rigidly in place. The complex conveyor system, carrying hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of aerospace-grade aluminum, grounded to a sudden jarring halt. The control panels on every machine flashed a single glaring error message in bold crimson letters. Late access expired. Dorgent operation. System lockdown initiated. Panic erupted on the factory floor. The shift foreman scrambled to reboot the systems, desperately cycling power to the main programmable logic controllers. It was useless. The Titan Matrix was deeply embedded in the firmware. A simple restart wouldn't bypass a cryptographic hard lock. Within 15 minutes, the entire production line was dead in the water. My phone started ringing at 6:22 a.m. I ignored it. I was busy enjoying a quiet breakfast, watching the morning news. By 7 a.m., my voicemail was full. The caller ID showed a frantic succession of numbers: the main factory line, Julian's personal cell, the HR director, and even a confused junior engineer I used to mentor. At 8:30 a.m., Sarah, my attorney, called. The cease and desist was delivered via email at 8 a.m., she reported, her voice thick with amusement. I also received red receipts from the board of directors and the private equity firm. Excellent, I replied. I suspect Julian is having a very bad morning. I wasn't wrong. The aerospace contract they were fulfilling had brutal penalty clauses for delayed shipments, to the tune of $50,000 a day. Worse, the private equity firm, entirely unaware of the precarious licensing situation, was demanding an immediate explanation for the sudden operational standstill. Julian's carefully constructed narrative of a streamlined, highly profitable factory was collapsing in real time. He had promised them a seamless transition, and instead, he had delivered a paralyzed facility facing massive intellectual property litigation. At 10 a.m., my phone buzzed again. This time, it was Carter. The old man, despite his failing health, had caught wind of the disaster. I answered. "Victor," Carter wheezed, sounding frail but furious. "What the hell is going on? The plant is dead. Julian is screaming about hackers and sabotage. He says you locked us out of the system." "I didn't sabotage anything, Carter," I said calmly. "Julian fired me for cause yesterday. Under the terms of the Vanguard LLC agreement we signed 5 years ago, my termination immediately voided the software lease. The system locked itself down automatically to prevent unauthorized, unlicensed use. Julian has the cease and desist order from my attorney." There was a long, heavy silence on the line. I could hear Carter struggling to process the monumental scale of his nephew's stupidity. He fired you? Right before the buyout? He wanted the $5 million patent bonus for himself, Carter. He thought he could claim work for hire and steal my intellectual property. He bet the entire company on a legal bluff, and he lost. Carter cursed loudly. A string of colorful profanities that proved the old foundry man was still in there somewhere. That arrogant, useless idiot. Victor, we have a major shipment due tomorrow. If we miss it, the penalties will bankrupt us, and the PE deal will fall through. What do you want? Name your price to turn the machines back on. Carter, I respect you, but this isn't a negotiation over a broken water pipe. Vanguard LLC's intellectual property was illegally seized and operated. The current price to reinstate the license and transfer ownership of the patents is no longer $5 million. Then what is it? He demanded, desperation bleeding into his voice. $10 million, I stated, the number cold and hard, wired directly to a Vanguard LLC escrow account by the close of business today. Plus, Julian is terminated immediately, escorted off the property by the same security guards he used on me. And I want a public retraction of the for cause termination, fully clearing my name. Those are the terms, non-negotiable. The meter is running, Carter. $50,000 a day in penalties and a collapsing buyout deal. I hung up the phone, leaving the founder to tower to deal with the monster he had allowed his nephew to become. The board was about to have a very interesting emergency meeting. The capitulation was spectacular and entirely predictable. When a company's valuation is heavily dependent on a proprietary technology, they suddenly realize they don't own, the leverage shifts with whiplash-inducing speed. The board of directors, facing the total collapse of an $80 million buyout and hemorrhaging cash and penalty fees, threw Julian under the bus so fast it left tire marks on his tailored suit. By 2 p.m., my lawyer, Sarah, forwarded me a desperate email from Apex Industrial's senior legal counsel. Not the junior associate Julian had bullied, but the high-priced crisis management firm they kept on retainer. They weren't fighting. They were surrendering unconditionally. The email contained a digitally signed agreement accepting all of my terms. The for cause termination was fully retracted, replaced with a glowing letter of recommendation and a statement acknowledging my 22 years of exemplary service. Julian was formally dismissed for gross negligence and breach of fiduciary duty, effectively vaporizing his equity options and blacklisting him in the industry. Most importantly, the financial terms were met. The private equity firm, furious at being misled but desperate to acquire the Titan Matrix technology, agreed to front the capital. By 4:45 p.m., a wire transfer of exactly $10 million cleared into the Vanguard LLC escrow account. It was a staggering sum, double the original bonus Julian had tried to steal. It was the price of arrogance, paid in full. I drove back to the factory at 5:30 p.m. The atmosphere was completely different from the day before. The security guard at the front gate, the same one who had escorted me out, gave me a sheepish wave and opened the turnstile immediately. I walked past the executive suites. Julian's office was dark, his nameplate already removed from the door. I felt a brief flash of pity, quickly extinguished by the memory of his smug face as he tried to ruin my life. I headed straight for the engineering mezzanine, ignoring the stares of the frantic production managers. I entered the server room, the only quiet space in the paralyzed factory. I opened my laptop, connected to the internal network, and initiated a secure handshake with the Vanguard server. I input the newly generated, permanent licensing keys that transferred ownership to the private equity firm as per the buyout agreement. I hit enter. Below me, the massive factory floor shuddered as the power cycled. The red warning lights blinked off, replaced by the steady green glow of operational status. The robotic arms hummed back to life, recalibrating their servos with precise mechanical grace. The pneumatic presses hissed, and the conveyor belts began to roll. The heartbeat of the $80 million empire was restored. The cheer that erupted from the factory floor was audible, even through the soundproof glass of the server room. The workers didn't know the exact details of the corporate bloodbath, but they knew the man who built the machines had returned to turn them back on. A few days later, I sat in my backyard, watching the sunset with a glass of expensive scotch.